All right, the purpose of this video is to focus on glute stability and glute strength. We're starting with a simple stretch, the 90-90 stretch, putting our front leg into a 90-degree position, our back leg into a 90-degree position, then hinging over that front leg, specifically my left in this instance, where I'm utilizing my sternum to dictate where I'm driving from. So in other words, I'm opening myself up, driving forward over that front knee, utilizing my sternum, of course, holding this for 8 to 10 seconds. You'll see in a second here, grabbing my sternum here, I'll point to it again. I'm going to turn and open up and now hinge over my shin. So we have 3 different positions we can work. We can hold over the knee, we can hold over the shin, or we can hold over the toe. As I open myself up, you're going to see my range of motion, or the ability for me to get my chest close to that ground, is going to drop off as it gets harder or tighter as I open up here. I'm using that left arm to push my left leg into the floor so it doesn't open up. Here is, again, that same concept. Now I'm just showing this idea of an internal rotation stretch as well on my right-hand side, where my femur is internally rotated. I'm rocking my head and chest, my body weight over that right-hand side to get a nice stretch on the inside of my right femur as it's internally rotated. Next here, we're going to focus on 2 different things. We have what's called passive range of motion internally in that femur. As you can see, I just picked my leg up. And then we have active range of motion, the amount of range of motion that we have control over utilizing our muscles. So here I'm doing an activation drill by turning the femur forward internally in space, lifting that foot off the ground, then releasing it and letting it come back down. We're gonna go for 6 to 8 of these, doing our best to stay as upright as possible. The more we lean to one side, the easier this movement will be. So try to stay as upright as possible, tipping that foot up in space, internally rotating, and then releasing. Switching sides here, same focal point, tipping up. And then we can even add in an extra cue here as we start to progress. So first and foremost, just focusing on tip forward, rotating that femur forward. Here's this variation where I'm laying down more or leaning more to the side to make this more manageable. As you can see, my range of motion just improved. The goal isn't to make it easy, but rather challenging and effective, so we can feel those stabilizing muscles of the hip working. Now I'm adding abduction plus that internal rotation of the femur, lifting the leg up in the air to abduct, then rotating that femur internally to get that foot off the ground. Here we're progressing to a mobility drill where we are doing the same cue of abduction followed by internal rotation. Then we are externally rotating as we open up and internally rotating as we come in. One more time, abducting, lifting up, external, rotating that hip outward till our heels touch, then internally rotating, internal, as we return that leg to that 90-degree position, staying in the air if possible. Anywhere from like 6 to 8 of these should be a good number to feel that ball and socket joint moving through the position. The goal, again, as a reminder, is not to fly through them, but take our time really feeling that joint moving. And here you can see I'm laying down to make it easier again. Same sort of accommodation can be made to make things a little bit more manageable. Tipping, tilting, as we move back and forth. Same thing on the opposite side here. I'm staying a little more upright to show you again. It's harder when we look more upright, but of course the ball and socket has to work harder. Moving to a figure 4 stretch is pretty wise, just as an added stretch for a deeper kind of focus on the hip, where we're pulling the foot toward ourselves and pushing the knee away. Here's a side angle, pulling the foot toward me with my left hand, pushing away with my knee as I lift up my left leg to create some leverage. So now we're going to talk about alignment really quick, and this is really important. I want you to see my foot pronated here and supinated here, pronated, and then as we switch views, this is a supinated position. You can see my big toes coming off the floor, and then pronating, the big toes being forced into the floor. So we want a balance point between the two. Now here we're showing femur rotation as well. This is an abducted femur versus an internally rotated femur. You can see my knee moving in and out, both in the lunge position and in a standard standing position. We want to keep those knees outward. A final thought is making sure we keep our core active, keeping that pelvic tilt. We don't want an arch to our back. Now here I'm demonstrating that the further our knee comes forward in space, the more our quad becomes active, where the further our butt goes backwards in space, the more the glute becomes active. Once again, quad forward, glute backwards. I'm going to demonstrate that here with an angle. I wish this was a little bit straighter, but that's okay. But you can see that my knees are pretty close to being over top of my ankles, and I'm just about drawing a straight line there. And here I'm bringing my knees forward to show my knees are way over my toes. This is a very quad dominant position versus the contrast here where I shift my hips backwards to get my knees over my ankles. This is a glute dominant position, all while activating this right here, external rotation at the femur. Knee in, lacking external rotation. Knee out, having external rotation. So here's a banded exercise here where I'm showing, again, this is a lack of external control, and then I'm driving against that band to create that external control or drive so I can feel my glutes, right? That's the focal point. Spread the toes, butt backwards in space, soft bend to the knees, brace the core. Not knees forward here, that's quads, but butt backwards, knees driven out from the hips, my glutes are active. Holding a position like that from anywhere from 30 seconds 2 times through can be wise, and then moving into something like a lateral band walk, maintaining these same cues, keeping those knees driven out from the hips, keeping that foot flat, not supinated, not pronated. Here we can move into our iso hold positions now, again demonstrating this idea of knee turning in. We don't want that. We want it driven out from the hip. And the front view here, you can see my knee and hip are in a line. I'm standing over that standing leg, meaning that back leg is just there for balance. All my weight, my eyes are way over my toes. All my weight's forward. Butt backwards in space, drop that knee. Again, I'm demonstrating I can lift my foot up because my balance is under control. We can keep that back foot down low though, drive that knee out from the hip and load this athletic position here. Just feeling isometric tension in the glute. The longer you sit here, the more that glute's gonna be active. Here again, I'm poking at that area that's active. The knee is over the ankle in space and the butt is dropped backwards so we can feel the glutes. It should all be that working side, in that case the right, in this case the left, but I'm holding isometric tension. Okay, so moving on to our next variation here, we're still holding isometric tension, but now we're going to rotate it at our T-spine and through our core so that we can create a stretch in that glute medius. So notice here, I'm going to turn and rotate toward the camera, getting my right hand toward the outside of my left foot, causing a stretch in my left glute. Here's our front angle, and notice as I rotate, I'm doing everything in my power to keep that right knee from moving horizontally in space. It's harder than it sounds. As you can see, my knee is moving a little bit, but I'm doing everything I can to work that external rotation of my hip, come into that stretch, come to neutral. Look at my hands here, pointing outward, representing my sternum, about 45 degrees to neutral. So look for that same idea. Can I turn from the sternum, not from the hips here, not from the knee, drive that knee out from the hip, turn using your sternum and T-spine, really your core and T-spine. The sternum is representing where you're facing. Here's a more advanced variation where we're going beyond the neutral point and opening up even further here. As you can see with my broomstick, I'm trying to stay as low as possible as I come into that stretch, then opening up, keeping that femur and knee in one spot as best as I can, rotating through that standing stretch glute. Stretching, paused, exhaling as I squeeze that stretch position to get extra activation of that glute muscle. Turning in, externally out. Here's another progressed variation. As a reminder, as always, if any of these variations are challenging to do balance-wise, please use something like a chair. But here's a hip airplane. I'm using one, of course, for stability as I'm turning inward, inviting that stretch. Back leg is extended. Then I'm rotating and rocking through, squeezing that glute muscle. Deep breath in, coming into a stretch. Externally rotating like an airplane, tipping upward. Here's another variation of an exercise that we're just doing a back step lunge that is a glute focused lunge where my knee is all the way over top of my ankle, nothing changing, right? Knee's not coming forward, butt back in space, knee stays over ankle. I squeeze that left glute, keeping external rotation in my femur. If you're a little more advanced, we should try something without maybe stability aid. So in this case, I'm doing it without that chair in front of me. I'm dropping my butt back in space, driving through that glute every single time. Knee over ankle the whole way through. Focus on the glutes. We should feel our glutes while we're squeezing the whole way through. If you don't feel your glutes, something's off. Reset those mechanics with the ankle and the knee. Now again, another progressed variation, and we are causing that stretch position like we did before, coming to neutral, then driving the knee up in space. Yes, this is a hip flexor raise, so we should feel our right hip flexor, but our left glute is keeping us stable, so we should feel that from start to finish. As I take this back step here, I'm turning inward, creating that stretch, exhaling, coming to neutral, keeping external rotation of that femur as then I step through and drive into that hip flexor raise. Another progressive exercise here is just a single leg RDL. I'm holding onto a broom for stability, hinging through that left glute, driving the knee up in space for a hip flexor raise. Same concepts, we're just changing positions. Working all off this left glute, driving in, stretch the hamstring, squeezing the glute from start to finish. Now moving into a curtsy lunge, again, just another progression that we could get into, not letting that knee come inward, but staying externally rotated, dropping back in space, loading this left glute, exhaling, rotating, and driving the knee up in space. In a couple seconds here, you can see my fingers pointed at the camera. Then as I drop into this curtsy lunge, I'm pointing out to that right, then back to neutral, making sure we're rotating through that T-spine and core. Here's a variation, of course, without the stability aid. Just make sure if you're doing this, you have good control. If we're kind of falling over the place, we want to definitely utilize the stability aid. Moving to the floor now, we're going to talk about a glute bridge, tucking the core to start, making sure our core is active. Then we're driving our hips up in space, squeezing those glutes with a 90-degree angle at our knee. You can kind of see that 90-degree angle. I have a band on in this case to remind me to drive my knees out from the hips to stay externally rotated. After about 30 seconds or so, I'm going to move into a pulsating variation where I'm releasing the glutes and squeezing the glutes. It is a range of contraction, not a range of motion, so focus on releasing and squeezing rather than just moving the hips up and down. We can, of course, start doing heavier exercises with these mechanics. For example, a sumo squat here I'm doing with a kettlebell, dropping my hips way back in space, knees over top of the ankles, knees driven out from the hips, and I'm driving up and down through those glutes, squeezing at the top. Here's a side angle, knees over the ankles, squeezing those glutes from bottom to top here. As always, remember we have our SMS acronym, our strength, massage, stretch. So we have our stretching, we have our strengthening, so it's important to mix in our massage work. Here I'm on a roller. I'm using a Rollgo one. These are the best rollers I've ever found. I'm not affiliated. I don't make money off of them, but I highly recommend grabbing one, or just something that can dig into your muscles a little more aggressive than a standard roller. I had a standard variation you were just seeing at the start where I was just rolling over top of the central portion of my glute max. Now I'm focused more on the glute medius here, where I'm kind of on the side, driving into that tighter area right by the hip, taking it real slow, and then here I'm rolling down a little lower into my IT band. Okay, there you guys have it. This is a concrete way, of course, to implement this idea of stretch, massage, strength, and SMS, so that you guys can stabilize your glutes, so that you can get stronger, you can have more power from these larger muscles. If you're someone who's dealing with an injury, then isolating, holding these iso holds, squeezing, moving through these positions is only going to help get blood flow to this area and loosen those target areas. Make time to stretch, listen to your body, make consistent efforts on a daily basis, and your glutes will become more stable, your balance will improve, your power will improve. Practice these things. If you have any questions, comment below, shoot me a text. Thank you guys for bearing with me, and have an awesome day.